My name is Corinne, and I am 31 years old. Thanksgiving was never just a holiday in my family. It was theater, a carefully staged performance of warmth and unity where everyone knew their lines. The house glowed with amber light, polished dishes reflecting the chandelier, the scent of roasted turkey and nutmeg drifting through every room. Laughter floated easily between my aunts and uncles. Cousins argued playfully over trivial things, and my mother wore that tight smile she reserved for gatherings that mattered. But beneath the soft clatter of silverware and rehearsed joy, something uneasy pulsed. Something I had felt my entire life without ever fully grasping. My father sat at the head of the table, unusually silent, his fingers resting on his glass, eyes distant yet storm-filled. I had seen that look before. The look that meant something was about to break. Then it happened with a violence no one anticipated. At Thanksgiving dinner, my dad stood up, in front of everyone, and shouted, "I'm done pretending she's my daughter." The words tore through the room like a blade. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze in trembling hands. Even the children fell into stunned silence, their confusion mirroring the disbelief etched across every adult face. The air itself seemed to harden. I felt dozens of eyes slam into me, felt the weight of judgment, shock, curiosity, pity, all of it suffocating at once. The room froze, my hands trembled. But I smiled, slowly stood up and said, "If you're being honest tonight." My voice surprised me. It did not crack, did not falter. Inside, my heart thundered so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. But outwardly, I moved with an eerie calm, as though I had rehearsed this moment in some forgotten corner of my mind. My father's expression flickered, not with regret, but with something closer to irritation, as if my composure denied him the spectacle he wanted. No one intervened. No one spoke. The silence became a living thing, thick and paralyzing. I pushed my chair back, its legs scraping against the floor like a scream, and turned away from the table. Every step toward the hallway felt impossibly loud, each breath razor-sharp in my lungs. I walked to the hallway closet, pulled out an old small thing. My fingers slid past coats and scarves until they closed around the familiar edges of the object. Hidden there, wrapped carefully in a faded cloth I had guarded for years. That closet had always been invisible to everyone else, an ordinary space for ordinary belongings. Yet for me, it had become a sanctuary of secrets, a place where truth slept quietly while doubt ruled the rest of the house. As I turned back, the murmurs began, low, uncertain, electric. Curiosity crackled through the dining room, pushing against the suffocating tension. My father's eyes locked onto what I carried, and for the first time that night, I saw something fracture in his confidence. His smiles vanished as I revealed the small wooden box, its surface scarred by time, its hinges delicate yet enduring. My grandmother's box, the single inheritance that had never felt material, never felt trivial. It was small enough to fit in my hands, yet heavy with everything unspoken in my family. "Where did you get that?" my father demanded, but the force had drained from his voice, replaced by a tight, brittle edge. I did not answer. I let the moment breathe, let the room absorb the significance none of them yet understood, because this night was not born from nowhere. It was the culmination of years of sideways glances, of questions that lingered just beyond hearing, of my father's cold distance that no achievement of mine ever thawed. Growing up, I learned to read the spaces between words, to sense the tension behind polite conversations. I was loved, yes, but always with an asterisk, always with an invisible hesitation I could never name. Only my grandmother had been different. She had looked at me with a certainty that felt like shelter, her presence a quiet rebellion against my father's perpetual doubt. Before she died, she had called me into her dimly lit room, her frail hands trembling as they pressed the wooden box into my palms. I remembered the weight of it, the urgency in her fading voice, the strange gravity of her instructions. "Not yet," she had whispered, her eyes burning with something fierce and protective. "Only when you must." Those words had echoed inside me for years, a riddle wrapped in inevitability. And now, standing in that stunned dining room, surrounded by relatives who suddenly felt like strangers, I understood exactly what she meant. My father stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched. My mother looked ghostly pale, her gaze fixed downward, as though eye contact might expose her to something catastrophic. Around us, the entire family leaned into the tension, drawn helplessly into a drama they never suspected simmered beneath. Holiday rituals and smiling photographs. "You want honesty?" I said at last, meeting my father's eyes, my hands no longer shaking. "Then let's be honest." The words hung between us, sharp and irreversible. Fear flickered across his face, quick, unmistakable, and deeply unsettling. The box was no longer just wood and metal. It was a threshold, a boundary between suspicion and revelation, between narrative and reality. My fingers traced the lid slowly, deliberately, every movement magnified by the breathless stillness surrounding me. Memories surged, my grandmother's unwavering gaze, her whispered warning, the unbearable patience of waiting. The room seemed to contract as though the walls themselves leaned closer. My father shifted forward, then stopped, his earlier fury now shadowed by dread. He knew. Somewhere deep down, he had always known. I lifted my eyes to him one final time, fully aware that whatever lay inside this small, time-worn box possessed the power to dismantle decades of assumptions, to redraw the very architecture of our family. And as my fingers tightened against the lid, poised on the brink of disclosure, every person in that room felt the same unspoken truth, that nothing, after this moment, would ever be the same again. When I opened Grandma's box, the sound was almost inaudible, a soft metallic sigh that somehow echoed louder than my father's outburst. Inside, nestled in yellowed fabric, lay objects that looked ordinary to anyone else: a folded letter, a thin silver chain, and a small, worn photograph. But the effect was immediate, seismic. My father's face drained of color. So quickly it was as if someone had pulled the life from him. His eyes locked onto the photograph with a terror so naked it silenced even the faintest whispers. No one else understood yet, but he did. He always had. My fingers moved with a strange certainty, lifting the letter first. The paper felt fragile, ancient, yet the handwriting was unmistakably firm. My grandmother's. The room held its breath as I unfolded it, every pair of eyes clinging to my hands, to my voice, to whatever truth was about to surface. I did not rush. After a lifetime of being measured, doubted, silently questioned, this moment demanded precision. "If you're being honest tonight," I began, my voice steady despite the storm inside me, "then everyone deserves to hear this." The words cut through the paralysis like a blade. My father shifted, his earlier rage now replaced by something far more desperate. "Corinne, don't," he said. But the authority was gone, replaced by a tremor that told its own story. I continued anyway, because this was why the box existed, why my grandmother had guarded it, why she had chosen me. The letter was not long, yet each sentence carried devastating weight. It spoke of a secret my father had buried decades ago, of a mistake he had tried to erase, of a truth that refused to stay hidden. Before I finished the first paragraph, the illusion shattered. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My aunt gasped audibly. My cousin stared in open disbelief. The letter revealed what my father had never imagined would survive him, that the doubt he weaponized against me had been born from his own betrayal, not my existence. The photograph passed silently from my hands to the center of the table, trembling fingers drawing it into view. A younger version of my father stared back from the image, standing beside a woman no one at that table had ever seen, his arm wrapped protectively around her. The resemblance between that woman and me was undeniable, brutal in its clarity. But it was the final lines of the letter that truly destroyed him. The confession my grandmother had preserved, the truth my father had feared more than humiliation itself. "You were never the one who needed pretending," I said quietly, lowering the paper. The silence that followed was unbearable, electric, charged with the collapse of everything my family believed. My father staggered backward as though struck, his legs nearly giving way. For years he had built his distance, his coldness, his suspicion on a foundation of projection, convincing himself that I was the uncertainty, that I was the fracture. Yet the box held irrefutable proof that the fracture had always been his own reflection. My mother's tears came suddenly, violently, years of suppressed knowledge exploding. into sobs that filled the room with a different kind of pain. Relatives who once sat comfortably in judgment now looked horrified, unsure where to place their eyes, their loyalties, their understanding of the man they thought they knew. My father tried to speak, but no words came. Only broken sounds, fragments of denial collapsing under the weight of documented truth. In that moment, the power dynamic that shaped my entire life inverted. The man who had just publicly disowned me now stood exposed, stripped of certainty, confronted by the one thing he could never dominate: reality. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only an immense disorienting release. The kind that comes when a lifelong tension finally snaps. "All those years," I said, my voice softer now yet impossibly heavy. "You looked at me like I was the question." My father's eyes, once so sharp with judgment, now overflowed with something closer to devastation. He understood the magnitude of what he had done, not merely tonight, but across decades. Because doubt once planted does not simply wound. It reshapes. It rewrites childhood. It alters identity. The letter slid from my hands back into the box, its purpose fulfilled at last. Around the table, the emotional wreckage was total. Shock, guilt, anger, grief. No, one remained untouched. My father sank into his chair, shoulders collapsing inward. A man crushed not by accusation but by confirmation. And yet, even within that ruin, something unexpected emerged: clarity. The performance was over. The theater dismantled. For the first time, there were no whispers, no unspoken suspicions, no invisible tensions. Only truth, raw and irreversible. I closed the lid gently, the small click sounding like the final note of a long, painful symphony. "I didn't come here for revenge," I said, meeting the stunned faces surrounding me. "I came here for honesty." The weight of that statement settled heavily over everyone, particularly my father, whose entire narrative had just disintegrated before those he once commanded with authority. As I turned to leave, the room remained frozen, but the silence had changed. It was no longer suffocating. It was reckoning. At the doorway, I paused, not out of hesitation, but out of something deeper: closure. "Some truths wait," I said quietly, my hand resting against the frame. "Not to destroy, but to end the pretending." And with that, I stepped into the cold night air, leaving behind a shattered illusion, a broken patriarch, and a family forced, at last, to confront the difference between belief and reality. If this story pulled you into its silence, its tension, its truth, subscribe to the channel. Because some stories aren't just told, they're revealed.